Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, where they plan to show off the latest updates to all their operating systems, is less than 2 months away, and it's heavily rumored that iOS 19 that powers iPhones is going to get a major new redesign, and that same new design will also trickle down to the iPad as well. Though there are tons of renders based on leaks and speculation on how the iPhone will look with the new glass design, which is being brought over from the Apple Vision Pro, there aren't lots of renders on how the new OS is going to look like on iPadOS. Basically, take this image that you see right here and imagine it on a larger canvas. However, based on new reports, it seems that iPadOS 19 will be much more than just a visual overhaul. According to Mark Gurman, who has a relatively solid track record when it comes to Apple rumors, he is reporting that iPadOS 19 will be a lot more like macOS. And that is something that has gotten me really excited. Ever since Apple introduced the M4 iPad Pro, it has become my main computer. And on this channel, I talk about how the iPad is the ultimate tool for me for not just content consumption, but also content creation. However, there are quite a few things that I really wish it had in terms of features, because to be honest, the hardware is great, not just for the iPad Pro, but even for the new iPad Airs. If anything, me and the entire iPad community have always said that the hardware of the iPad is fantastic, and also the processor. The M series chips are also blazing fast. It just doesn't take full advantage of iPadOS, but I think this year we're gonna see a change. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to share my screen and we can go over this report that's on 9to5Mac of exactly how iPadOS 19 will be more like macOS. So without any further ado, let's dive in. All right, so iPadOS to be more like macOS and major overhaul. So according to Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, Apple is planning to make its upcoming iPadOS 19 more like macOS. This comes after many years of complaints about the capability of the iPad's operating system. Every year when Apple introduces a new version of iPadOS, it sometimes feels like an afterthought. Like it almost feels like iOS is the big thing. And oh yeah, let's take some of the things that we introduced with iOS and bring it to the iPadOS. It doesn't feel like we're getting anything special or anything extra to take advantage of this great processor and the hardware itself. But once again, yes, it is true. A lot of people have complained about it for quite a few years, and looks like Apple is listening. This will accompany the large overhauls across Apple's ecosystem, including massive iPhone redesign with iOS 19, as well as the Mac's first design overhaul in half a decade. So it's not just going to be iOS and iPadOS that are going to have a visual overhaul. It seems like the Mac is also going to be getting quite a bit of love as well. So here is how Mark Gurman describes the iPadOS 19 upgrade. I'm told that this year's upgrade will focus on productivity, multitasking, and app window management, with an eye on the device operating more like a Mac. It's been a long time coming, with iPad power users pleading with Apple to make the tablet more powerful. So there's 3 key things that he's talking about here: productivity, multitasking, and app window management. And this is music to my ears. I think not just for me, but for a lot of people who have been on the fence of making the iPad their main computer. This might convert them from a Mac to an iPad. And who knows, right? It could be, it could not be. But productivity, multitasking, and window management, though those are 3 key big things, Mark Gurman doesn't really go into detail about those specific things. When it comes to productivity, the only thing that I can really think about, aside from the multitasking and app window management, is file management. Also, when it comes to plugins, right? You can download plugins, but those plugins don't necessarily work in all the applications. For example, if you use the desktop version of Final Cut Pro, for example, there are a lot of cool plugins that you can get with that. There's a lot of cool transitions and effects that you can download on the Mac app, but you can't necessarily do that on the iPad app. In fact, if anything, I feel like even the Pro apps on the iPad feel like watered down versions of the Mac apps. And it's not just Apple's own applications, even Adobe Photoshop, for example, it's just a watered down version of the Mac app. And yes, every year there are new features that it's more capable of, but overall, the productivity on those apps is not the same as it is on a Mac app. And to be honest, that's pretty much what Mark Gurman really just said. Very vague, I know, but yet very exciting at the same time. And 9to5Mac goes on to say that this has been long in the making. That is true. iPads have had hardware that far outpaces its software for at least 4 years now, and that's definitely been a top complaint from enthusiasts. Obviously, this is just more like macOS, not macOS directly. So I want to tailor your expectations here We're not getting macOS. However, we are getting the iPadOS to be more like macOS when it comes to productivity and using the iPad more like a computer or a content creation device. iPadOS was never meant to be like macOS and vice versa, right? So don't be disappointed if you're someone who's really wanting macOS to come to the iPadOS. These are two different devices and they definitely deserve two different operating systems. And this year, more than ever before, I am super excited about iPadOS 19. More excited about iPadOS 19 than even iOS 19 because, you know, this right here is my main computer. And I've said this over and over, and on my channel, I've done a lot of videos on how I talked about this device replacing my Mac. So to have this device right here be more powerful in the coming months is amazing. But obviously you're still getting a visual overhaul and the look and feel is going to be very interesting and different. And to be very honest, the last time we saw a huge visual overhaul was with iOS 7, and that was a long time ago. So I'm all in for a new visual overhaul, new features for the iPad. But at the end of the day, I want to know your thoughts. What features and things you want to see iPadOS get? And hey, it may not be a Mac replacement for everyone. For some people, it's just meant to be an iPad for doing simple tasks, right? But either way, comment below, let me know your thoughts on this report and also what you like to see in future iPadOS updates. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you next time.